The lights came back on. The screen behind me showed the deed proving I owned everything. And in that silence, you could hear my family's world shatter. Now watch what happens when the police walk in. The silence that followed my declaration was shattered by a sound so ugly it made the crystal glasses on the tables vibrate. Brad slammed his fist onto the white tablecloth, sending silverware clattering to the floor. He stood up, his chair falling backward with a loud crash, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic that he was desperately trying to twist into righteous indignation. "She is lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes wild. "Do not listen to her. She is a fraud. This is all a trick, special effects. She is just a jealous, broke waitress trying to ruin us because she could never be one of us." He looked around at the investors, his desperation palpable, sweat soaking through his expensive shirt. "I am telling you, she is unstable. She hacked the system. That document is a forgery. I am calling the police right now." I stood center stage, calm and untouched by his hysteria. "You do not need to call them, Brad," I said, my voice amplified and cool. "They are already on their way. But before they get here, I think everyone should hear what you really think of your investors and your family." I signaled the tech booth again. The deed of ownership on the massive screen vanished, replaced by a video feed. It was grainy, but clear enough. The audio, however, was crystal perfect. It was the recording from the balcony, the one I had captured while steaming Kesha's dress. Brad's voice boomed through the surround sound speakers, filling every corner of the ballroom. "The Wellingtons are driving me insane. You have no idea what I am dealing with." Brad froze on the floor, his eyes glued to the screen where his own silhouette was pacing back and forth. "No, the money is coming, I promise. Marcus is going to collect millions from these gullible investors." The investors in the room gasped. Mr. Henderson stood up, his face turning red. "They are idiots, all of them. Kesha thinks we are buying a vacation home in Aspen. She has no clue. As soon as the funds clear the offshore account tomorrow morning, I am gone." On the screen, Brad laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "I am taking every dime, and I am hopping on the first flight to Rio. You and I are going to live like kings, babe. Just wait one more day." The recording ended, leaving a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Kesha was the first to move. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling violently. She looked at the screen, then at Brad, who was backing away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Rio?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You said Aspen. You said we were building a future." Brad stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Baby, it's not what it looks like. She edited it. That's not me." Kesha let out a scream that sounded like an animal in a trap. It was a primal release of humiliation and rage. She did not just cry. She lunged. She flew across the space between them, her hands curled into claws. She tackled him, crashing into the table, sending plates and glasses flying. "You thief!" she shrieked, raking her nails down his face. "You liar! You were going to leave me! You were going to steal everything!" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Brad fell backward, trying to shield his face, but Kesha was relentless, fueled by the fury of a woman who realized her entire life was a joke. My mother was screaming, clutching my father's arm. My father stood paralyzed, staring at the shattered remains of his gala, his face gray as ash. Security guards rushed from the perimeter, trying to pull Kesha off Brad, but she was holding on with a death grip, screaming obscenities that echoed off the high ceilings. I watched from the stage, a statue of judgment, witnessing the destruction of the people who had tried to destroy me. It was ugly, it was violent, and it was entirely of their own making. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open with a thunderous bang. Heavy boots stomped across the marble floor, marching in perfect formation. "Atlanta police, nobody move." The shouting died instantly, replaced by the heavy, suffocating reality of judgment. Blue lights flashed from the hallway, cutting through the gloom. The officers swarmed the room, their hands resting on their holsters, heading straight for the VIP table where my family lay in the wreckage of their own greed. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open with a force that rattled the hinges, admitting a phalanx of uniformed officers who moved with practiced efficiency. The murmurs of the fleeing guests died instantly, replaced by the heavy, suffocating silence of judgment. I stood motionless on the stage, my silver dress catching the harsh overhead lights, watching the final act of the tragedy my family had written for themselves. They did not go for the exits. They went straight for the VIP table where the wreckage of the Wellington dynasty was still scattered across the floor. Marcus Wellington, an officer with a jaw like granite announced, his voice booming through the space. You are under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and the falsification of federal loan documents. My father, who had spent his life puffing out his chest to look bigger than he was, suddenly seemed to shrink. He stammered, his hands trembling as he reached for his lapels, trying to straighten a tuxedo that no longer mattered. There must be a mistake. I am a businessman. I am hosting a gala. The officer didn't argue. He simply spun him around and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, the metal ratcheting, echoing like a gunshot. The man who had torn up my tuition check, who had sneered at my struggle, was now bound like a common criminal. Beside him, my mother let out a scream that clawed at the air. No, you cannot do this. We are the victims here. She did this. She hacked our accounts. She is the one you want. Sylvia Wellington, another officer said, stepping forward and grabbing her wrist before she could point again, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding in the falsification of financial records. She fought. It was a pathetic, flailing struggle, her heels skidding on the wine-stained floor as they forced her hands behind her back. Her dignity, which she prized above her own children, was stripped away in seconds. Then they turned to Brad. He had stopped backing away, hitting the wall near the service entrance. He looked at the officers, then at me, and I saw the moment he realized the true depth of his error. Bradley Tucker, a detective in a plain suit said, stepping out from behind the uniforms, you are under arrest for insider trading, corporate espionage, and embezzlement. We have the logs from the Onyx holding servers you attempted to breach. Brad's face went the color of old paper. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just slumped, the air leaving his body as if he had been punctured. He looked at me one last time, his eyes hollow, realizing that the nobody he had mocked was the architect of his destruction. As the officers began to march them toward the exit, a procession of the damned, my mother's eyes locked onto mine. The rage in them vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying clarity of her situation. She planted her feet, resisting the officer's grip, and turned her head toward the stage. "Naya!" she screamed, the sound raw and desperate. "Naya, tell them to stop. I am your mother." I watched her, my face a mask of stone. "You have to help us," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her expensive makeup. "You cannot let them take me to jail. Naya, I gave you life. You are my daughter." The room seemed to hold its breath. The few remaining staff members, the police, even Kesha, frozen on the floor, looked at me. I stepped down from the stage, the metal of my dress chiming softly. I walked until I was 10 feet away from them. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman who should have protected me. I found nothing but a stranger who used love as a currency I could never afford. I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm, cold, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are mistaken, Sylvia." She blinked, her mouth falling open. "You do not have a daughter named Naya," I said, my words precise and sharp. "You made that very clear in the lobby yesterday. You made it clear when you threw me out at 18. You made it clear every day you chose your image over my existence." I leaned in closer, my eyes hard. "You do not have a daughter. You only have a failure, remember? And failures cannot save anyone." I straightened up and nodded to the officers. "Get them out of my hotel." My mother's wail as they dragged her through the double doors was a sound I would never forget, a mixture of grief and fury that faded into the distance as the heavy doors slammed shut. And then there was silence. The ballroom was empty, save for the security team, the staff, and one person left in the center of the ruin, Kesha. She was sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass and spilled wine, her legs sprawled out in her ruined white dress. Her husband was gone. Her parents were gone. Her audience was gone. She looked around the vast, empty room, her eyes wide and unseeing, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. The golden child had been left behind in the darkness, tarnished and dull. Mr. Sterling stepped out of the shadows. He walked toward her with a solemn, professional gait, holding a silver tray in his hands. On it lay a single folded piece of paper. He stopped in front of her and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Tucker," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Kesha looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a broken doll. "What?" she whispered. Mr. Sterling extended the tray. "Since the primary cardholders have been taken into custody and their accounts frozen, the outstanding balance for the event, the rooms, and the damages falls to the remaining party." He placed the bill on the table next to her. "That is $250,000, ma'am. We will require immediate payment." Kesha stared at the paper, then at me standing in the shadows, then back at the bill. Her lip trembled, and she pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her hands as the reality of her solitude crashed down around her. She was alone, penniless, and liable for a fortune she had never earned. Kesha stared at the bill on the silver tray, her hands shaking so violently that the paper rattled against the metal. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes, blurring into a nightmare she could not wake up from. 250,000 was a fortune, but even the $50,000 listed as immediate personal damages for the destruction of the pool area and the ruined suite felt like a death sentence. She looked toward the heavy double doors where our parents had just been dragged away in cuffs, and then she looked at the service exit, illuminated by a dim green sign. Panic, the kind that overrides all logic and dignity, seized her. She did not scream. She did not argue. She simply kicked off her expensive heels and ran. She hiked up the skirt of her ruined white gown and bolted toward the kitchen doors, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble floor. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to outrun consequences that had already caught her. She did not make it 10 feet. Ray, the head of security, who she had tried to have fired just 24 hours earlier, stepped into her path with the immobility of a brick wall. He did not even have to grab her. He just stood there, arms crossed, a look of bored expectation on his face. Kesha slammed into his chest and bounced back, stumbling and falling onto her hip. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Tucker?" Ray asked, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The police are still outside processing your husband. If you would like to join them, I can escort you out right now." Kesha scrambled backward, pushing herself across the floor until her back hit the leg of a table. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet, the mascara creating black tracks down her face. Gone was the arrogant girl who had mocked my clothes. Gone was the sister who had laughed while her husband threw money at my feet. "Nia," she gasped, her voice cracking, "please, you cannot let them do this to me. I did not sign those papers. Brad did. Mom and Dad did. I just wanted to have a nice party. I did not know they were stealing." I walked over to her, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor, towering over her, just as she had towered over Mrs. Higgins at the pool. I looked down at her, examining her like a specimen under a microscope. "You knew, Kesha," I said, my voice calm and quiet. "You knew when you used a credit card that wasn't yours. You knew when you bullied the staff. You knew when you cut up my dress. You might not have signed the loan documents, but you spent the money, and you enjoyed every single second of the cruelty that bought this lifestyle." "I don't have it," she wailed, pulling at her hair. "I don't have $50,000. Brad took everything. The accounts are frozen. I have nothing. Nia, please, I am your sister. We share blood. You cannot leave me here with this debt. They will put me in jail." I signaled to Mr. Sterling. He stepped forward, holding a plastic bag that looked starkly out of place in the opulent ballroom. He handed it to me, and I held it out to Kesha. She looked at the bag, confused. "What is this?" I dropped it into her lap. It landed with a soft thud. "It is your bailout," I said. Kesha opened the bag and pulled out the contents. It was a gray polyester dress, shapeless and dull, with a white apron and a name tag that was blank. It was a housekeeping uniform, the standard issue for the staff she had terrorized all weekend. "I bought your debt from the hotel," I explained, my voice businesslike and cold. "I paid the $50,000 you owe for the damages you personally caused." Hope flared in her eyes, wretched and desperate. "Oh, thank you, Naya, thank you. I knew you wouldn't—" "I am not finished," I cut her off. "You owe the money to me now, and since you have no assets, no husband, and no home, you are going to work it off." "Work it off?" she whispered, staring at the ugly gray fabric. "Yes," I said. "You are going to work here at the Royal Monarch as a member of the housekeeping staff. Mrs. Higgins will be your direct supervisor. You will scrub the toilets. You will change the sheets. And you will clean up the messes that entitled guests leave behind, just like you used to do. I did the math for you," I continued, watching the realization dawn on her face. "At $15 an hour, which is the starting rate, plus overtime, it will take you roughly 3,333 hours to pay off the principal. That is about 1.5 years of full-time labor, assuming you do not incur any more penalties." Kesha looked from the uniform to me, her face twisting in horror. "You cannot be serious. You want me to be a maid here, where everyone knows me?" "It is a generous offer, Kesha," I said, leaning down so our faces were level. "The alternative is that I hand that bill over to the detectives waiting outside, along with the footage of you assaulting a staff member. You will go to prison for felony destruction of property and assault. You will be in a cell with your mother and your husband. So, what is it going to be? The uniform or the handcuffs?" The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Kesha looked at the exit, where the blue lights of the police cruisers were still flashing against the glass. Then she looked at the gray dress in her hands, her fingers trembling so hard the fabric shook. She looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the sister she had tormented, hoping to find a crack in my armor. But I was onyx now, hard and impenetrable. I saw the fight leave her body. Her shoulders slumped and her head bowed. She gripped the polyester fabric, her knuckles turning white as she made the only choice she had left, accepting her fall from the golden pedestal to the linoleum floor. The visitation room at the Fulton County Jail was a stark gray box that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat, a world away from the scented air and velvet furnishings of the Royal Monarch. I sat on a cold metal stool, my hands folded calmly on the stainless steel ledge, waiting for the show to begin. When the heavy door on the other side of the glass partition buzzed open, my parents shuffled in. The transformation was shocking. Without his tailored suits and Spanx, my father, Marcus, looked deflated, his posture slumped and his belly protruding over the elastic waistband of his orange jumpsuit. My mother, Sylvia, was even worse. Without her layers of makeup, her hair extensions, and her designer armor, she looked frail and gray, her face a map of wrinkles I had never seen before. They picked up the black telephone receivers in unison, their eyes locking onto me with a desperate, hungry intensity. I picked up my receiver, pressing the hard plastic against my ear. "Naya, baby," my mother began, her voice cracking instantly into a sob. "Look at us. Look at what they are doing to us. The food is inedible. The beds are like concrete. I am an old woman, Naya. I cannot survive in here. You have to get us out." My father leaned in, his forehead pressing against the glass, leaving a greasy smudge. "Listen to me, Naya. We know you're angry. We get it. We made mistakes. But this has gone too far. We are your parents. You cannot let your own flesh and blood rot in a cage. You have the money now. You have the power. One phone call from Onyx Holdings and this all goes away. You can pay the bail. You can hire the best defense team." I watched them perform the same routine they had used my entire life, the alternating currents of guilt and demand. They were not sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had been caught. They still saw me as a resource, a bank account with a pulse. "I am not here to bail you out," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the warmth they were seeking. "I am here to say goodbye." My mother's face twisted into a mask of ugly entitlement. Goodbye, you ungrateful little witch. After everything we gave you life. We put a roof over your head. You put a roof over my head until I was 18, and then you kicked me out because I wouldn't marry a man who could pay off your gambling debts. But that's not really why I'm done. It's not the fraud, it's not the lies, it's not even the way you treated me at the hotel. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single piece of paper, pressing it against the glass so they could read it. It was a photocopy of a pawn shop receipt dated 5 years ago. Do you recognize this? My father squinted at the paper, then recoiled as if he had been burned. My mother went silent, her eyes darting away. That's the receipt for Grandma Rose's sapphire ring, I said, my voice dropping an octave. The ring she left specifically to me in her will. The only thing I ever asked for. You told me it was lost during the move. You told me it was stolen, but you sold it. You sold my inheritance for $4,000 so you could go on a weekend trip to Cabo. It was just a ring, my father muttered, his defense weak and pathetic. We needed the break. We were under so much stress. It was the only thing she left me, I said, the old hurt finally rising to the surface only to be washed away by the cold tide of my resolve. It was the only proof that someone in this family actually loved me, and you traded it for margaritas and a tan. I stood up, the metal stool scraping against the floor. The sound echoed in the small room, signaling the end. I have instructed my legal team to block all communication from you. You will not call me. You will not write to me. If you try to contact me through third parties, I will consider it harassment, and I will add it to the list of charges. You are on your own. Naya, wait, my mother screamed, slamming her hand against the glass. You cannot leave us here. We are your family. I looked at the woman who had birthed me and felt absolutely nothing. The cord was finally cut. I already told you, Sylvia, I said, turning toward the door. You do not have a daughter. I hung up the receiver, leaving their pleas trapped behind the glass, silent and impotent. I signaled the guard to open the door. As I walked down the long, sterile corridor, the sound of my heels clicking on the linoleum felt like a countdown to freedom. I pushed open the heavy metal exit doors and stepped out into the Atlanta afternoon. The sun was blindingly bright, and the air tasted sweet with the scent of exhaust and rain and absolute, unbridled liberty. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they burned, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the weight of the Wellington name pressing down on me. I was just Naya, and that was finally enough. The air in the federal detention center was colder than the county jail, a sterile chill that seemed to seep into the marrow of the bones. I sat in a private attorney visitation room, my briefcase resting on the table in front of me. I was not here as a sister-in-law or a grieving relative. I was here as a proxy, a creditor, and the executive of a life that was being systematically dismantled. When the door opened, Brad shuffled in. The transformation was even more drastic than my parents. The golden boy of Atlanta finance, the man who had thrown $500 at my feet with a sneer, was gone. In his place was a gaunt, pale man with greasy hair and eyes that darted around the room like a trapped rat. He wore a beige jumpsuit that washed out his complexion, making him look like a ghost of his former self. He sat down, the chains on his ankles jingling softly. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of his old arrogance, a muscle memory of superiority. "So, you came to gloat?" he said, his voice raspy. I did not smile. I did not offer him any comfort. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, sliding them across the metal table. "I am here on behalf of my employee, Kesha Wellington," I said. "She is currently indisposed as she is working a double shift in the laundry department of the Royal Monarch to pay off her debts. She has granted me power of attorney to handle her marital affairs." Brad stared at the papers. The word divorce was stamped across the top page in bold black letters. "She is leaving me," he whispered, a look of genuine shock crossing his face. "After everything? I did this for us. I did this to buy her the life she wanted." You did this because you are a greedy, narcissistic thief, Brad. I corrected him, my tone clinical. And Kesha does not want a husband who is facing 20 years in federal prison. She wants a clean slate. She wants her maiden name back. And most importantly, she wants to ensure that none of her future earnings, meager as they may be, are attached to your restitution payments. He picked up a pen, his hand shaking. I watched as he signed the papers, signing away his marriage, his assets, and his last link to the outside world. When he finished, he pushed the stack back toward me. He did not stand up to leave. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate, pathetic gleam. "Naya, listen," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know we have had our differences. I know I was rough on you, but you are a businesswoman. You recognize talent." I raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. "I know the markets, Naya," he continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "I know where the bodies are buried in the city. I know which developers are over-leveraged. I know how to structure deals that technically skirt the regulations, but bring in massive returns. Once I get out, even if it is in a few years with good behavior, I will need a landing spot. No one else will touch me." He reached out as if to touch my hand, but stopped short when I recoiled. "Hire me, Naya. Bring me into Onyx Holdings as a consultant, off the books. I can make you billions. I can be your shark. You know I'm good at it. I am begging you. I have nothing left. My reputation is ash. You are the only one who can save me." I looked at him, this man who had mocked my poverty, who had tried to steal my father's fake fortune, who had planned to abandon my sister in a foreign country. He was offering me his soul, thinking it still held value. I stood up, collecting the divorce papers and sliding them into my briefcase. I snapped the lock shut, the sound echoing like a final verdict in the small room. "You are mistaken about two things, Brad," I said, looking down at him. "First, you are not getting out in a few years. With the evidence I provided to the SEC and the district attorney, you will be an old man before you see the sky without bars." I paused, letting that sink in. "And second, regarding your offer of employment," I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "Onyx Holdings has very strict hiring standards. We look for integrity, we look for vision, and most importantly, we look for value." I turned toward the door. "We do not hire trash." I signaled the guard and walked out, leaving him sitting alone at the metal table, his mouth open in a silent scream of despair. I walked through the security checkpoints, my steps light and rhythmic. As I passed through the waiting area of the prison, a television mounted on the wall caught my attention. It was tuned to a local news channel. The banner at the bottom of the screen flashed red. "Breaking news." I stopped and watched. The anchor was speaking in a grave tone. "Moments ago, a federal grand jury handed down a scathing indictment against Bradley Tucker, the former financial whiz kid linked to the Royal Monarch gala scandal." The screen cut to footage of Brad being led out of the courthouse earlier that week, looking disheveled and broken. Tucker faces charges of grand larceny, securities fraud, and money laundering. Experts say the evidence, reportedly provided by an anonymous whistleblower in the industry, is overwhelming. If convicted, Tucker faces a maximum sentence of 25 years in a maximum security facility. I watched for a moment longer, watching the world see Brad exactly what he was. Then I turned away and pushed open the doors to the outside, the fresh air hitting my face. The divorce papers in my bag felt light as a feather. Brad was history. Now it was time to see how my sister was handling her new reality. The staff elevator opened onto the 4th floor with a quiet hum. I stepped out into the service corridor. The smell of industrial-strength citrus cleaner hung heavy in the air. This was the operational heart of the Royal Monarch, the hidden veins that kept the luxury alive. And it was here that my sister was learning her first real lesson in humility. I found Kesha in room 412. She was on her knees, her hands encased in yellow Weber gloves, scrubbing the porcelain of a toilet bowl with a ferocity born of rage and desperation. Her once manicured nails were short and unpolished, her hair pulled back into a severe bun covered by a hairnet. She looked exhausted, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. Standing over her, arms crossed and face impassive, was Mrs. Higgins, the woman Kesha had tried to humiliate at the pool. Mrs. Higgins was now the floor supervisor, and she was performing her duties with meticulous fairness. "You missed the rim, Kesha," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice calm but firm. "You need to get under the lip." "I am trying," Kesha snapped, her voice cracking. "I have been scrubbing this thing for 10 minutes. It is clean enough." "It is clean when I say it is clean," Mrs. Higgins replied. "And at the Royal Monarch, we do not do enough. We do perfect. Do it again." Kesha let out a sound of pure frustration, throwing the scrub brush into the bucket, water splashing onto her gray uniform. She sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her glove, leaving a streak of cleaning fluid across her skin. "I hate this," she muttered. "I hate this place. I hate this uniform." "Then you should have thought about that before you racked up a $50,000 bill," I said, stepping into the room. Kesha jumped, scrambling to her feet. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shame and hope. "Naya," she breathed, "you came? Please tell me you came to get me out of here. I cannot do this anymore. My hands are raw, my back is killing me, and the staff, they look at me like I'm dirt." "They look at you like you are a coworker, Kesha," I corrected her, "which is a step up from how you looked at them. And you are not leaving. You have worked off exactly $400 of your debt. You have $49,600 to go." She burst into tears, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her thin frame. "Naya, please, I learned my lesson. I swear I will never be mean again. I will never spend money I do not have. Just let me go. I will pay you back. I will find another job, a real job." "This is a real job," I said, my voice hard, "and it is the only one you are qualified for right now. You have no degree, no experience, and a criminal record pending if you walk out that door." I walked over to the toilet, peering down into the bowl. It was still streaked with cleaner. Mrs. Higgins was right. It was not done. "You missed a spot," I said, pointing. Kesha looked at me, disbelief warring with despair. "You are enjoying this, aren't you? You like seeing me on my knees." "I do not enjoy it, Kesha," I said, looking her in the eye. "I enjoy justice. I enjoy balance. For years, you treated people like they were beneath you. You treated me like I was beneath you. Now you are learning that the floor is hard and cold for everyone. Get back to work." I turned to Mrs. Higgins. "Make sure she finishes the entire floor before her break." "Yes, Miss Wellington," Mrs. Higgins said, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. I walked out of the room, leaving my sister to her tears and her toilet bowl. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with an alert. It was a notification from my real estate acquisitions team. A property had just hit the foreclosure auction list. I opened the file and stopped dead. The address was familiar. It was 422 Maple Drive. My parents' house, the mansion they had leveraged into oblivion, the home where I had been raised and rejected, was going on the block tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen, a plan forming in my mind that was colder and more complete than anything I had done so far. "Buy it," I texted my broker. "Get it for pennies and bring a bulldozer." The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic drone echoing off the concrete steps of the county courthouse, a sound that usually signaled the end of dreams, but today signaled the beginning of my closure. I stood at the back of the small crowd, my face obscured by oversized sunglasses, my posture rigid. The sun beat down on the pavement, but I felt cold, focused. I was not here to invest. I was here to bury a ghost. The property at 422 Maple Drive was up next. The address alone sent a phantom ache through my chest. My father's pride and joy. The mansion he had leveraged 3 times over to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. The bank had finally come to collect, seizing the assets of a man who was currently trading cigarettes for protection in a federal holding cell. The bidding started low, shockingly low. It was a testament to how much damage my family had done to the property's value through neglect and deferred maintenance. A few developers half-heartedly raised their paddles, looking for a quick flip. I waited, letting the numbers climb sluggishly until the momentum stalled. Then I raised my hand. $1 million, I said, my voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The auctioneer paused, blinking. He looked at me, then at the other bidders. Silence. No one was going to touch that number for a foreclosure with structural issues. Sold to the lady in the back. I signed the papers with a steady hand, the ink drying on the deed that transferred the Wellington estate into the Onyx Holdings. I did not feel triumph. I felt a grim satisfaction, like a surgeon removing a tumor. An hour later, I pulled my car up the winding driveway. The gates were open, hanging crookedly on their hinges. The lawn was overgrown, the fountain dry and filled with dead leaves. The house loomed ahead, a brick monstrosity that had once intimidated me, but now just looked tired and hollow. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The air was stale, smelling of dust and abandoned ambition. The furniture was gone, repossessed by creditors, leaving only the outlines on the carpets where the sofas and tables had stood. I walked through the empty rooms, my heels clicking on the hardwood. The dining room where I was told to keep my elbows off the table, the living room where I was not allowed to sit on the good furniture, the kitchen where I washed dishes while Kesha watched TV. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister. It felt rough under my fingertips, the varnish peeling. I walked past the master suite, avoiding the open door, and headed down the hall to the back of the house, to the smallest room above the garage. My room. It was tiny, barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk. The window looked out over the alley where the garbage cans were kept. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was empty now, just 4 white walls and a stained beige carpet. But I could still see myself there. 16 years old, crying into my pillow after being told I was too stupid for college, hoping that one day I would be someone. I stood there for a long time, letting the memories wash over me. The cold nights, the hunger, the constant low-grade fear of displeasing my mother. I waited for the sadness to come, but it did not. All I felt was a deep, abiding disgust. I walked out of the room, closing the door with a soft click. I walked back down the stairs and out the front door into the bright Atlanta sunshine. A black truck was waiting in the driveway. The logo on the side read Henderson Architecture and Demolition. A man in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest was leaning against the hood, reviewing a set of blueprints. He looked up as I approached. "Miss Wellington," he said, extending a hand, "I am David Henderson. You said you had a vision for the property." I shook his hand. "I do not want to renovate, David," I said, turning to look at the house one last time. "I do not want to flip it. I do not want to sell it." He looked confused. "Then what do you want to do?" "I want you to destroy it." "Destroy it?" he repeated, blinking. "You mean demo the whole thing?" "The foundation, too. Everything," I said, my voice hard. "Every brick, every beam, every shingle. I want it gone. I want the earth salted beneath it. And then," I continued, "I want you to build something new, something that matters. I want a facility here, a shelter, a sanctuary for young girls who have been kicked out by their families, girls who have been told they are worthless, girls who have nowhere else to go." I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to him. "These are the preliminary sketches. I want classrooms. I want a therapy wing. I want a garden where they can grow their own food. And I want the bedrooms to be big, huge, with windows that look out at the trees, not the trash." David looked at the sketches, his expression softening into a smile. "This is the Phoenix Project," he said, reading the title page. "Rising from the ashes." "Exactly," I said. "When do you want to break ground?" he asked, rolling up the blueprints. I looked at the excavator parked on the trailer behind his truck, the yellow paint gleaming in the sun. Right now. I signaled to the operator sitting in the cab. The engine roared to life, a mechanical growl that shook the ground, birds scattering from the trees. The massive machine rolled off the trailer, its metal treads chewing up the asphalt of the driveway. I stood next to David, watching as the excavator raised its hydraulic arm. The metal bucket gleamed like a fist prepared to strike. The operator positioned the machine in front of the portico, the grand entrance my mother had loved so much. "Do it," I whispered. The arm swung, the bucket smashed into the pillars with a deafening crash, wood splintering, glass shattering, brick crumbling into dust. The roof of the porch collapsed with a groan of dying timber, a cloud of debris billowing into the air like smoke. I did not look away. I watched as the walls came down, exposing the rot underneath. I watched as my past was pulverized into rubble, clearing the way for a future that belonged to me. 1 year later, the sun was shining just as brightly as it had on the day of the auction, but this time it was illuminating something beautiful. Where the rotting hulk of the Wellington mansion had once stood, the Phoenix Project was now a reality, a sprawling complex of glass and warm wood, designed to let the light in to every corner. I stood at the podium, the oversized scissors in my hand, looking out at the crowd of donors, city officials, and, most importantly, the first group of young women who would call this place home. They looked at me with eyes that held a mixture of fear and hope, eyes that I recognized because I used to see them in the mirror every morning. I cut the red ribbon, the silk parting with a satisfying snip, and the applause that washed over me felt different than the hollow adulation of the gala. It felt real. It felt earned. In the back of the crowd, I saw a woman in a gray uniform clapping harder than anyone else. It took a moment to recognize my sister, Kesha. She looked older, tired, her hands rough from work, but there was a peace in her face I had never seen before. She was still paying her debt, still scrubbing floors at the hotel, but she was doing it with an honesty she never possessed when she was rich. We were not friends, we might never be close again, but we were no longer enemies. She was building her own life, brick by hard-earned brick, and I respected that. My parents were not there to see their former home transformed into a sanctuary. They were currently serving the first year of their sentences in separate federal facilities, trading their freedom for the fraud they had committed. Their appeals had been denied, their assets seized, their names forgotten by the society they had tried so hard to impress. And Brad was gone. The federal case was a slam dunk, and after his sentencing, he had been deported back to the country of his birth, penniless and disgraced, banned from ever entering the United States or the financial sector again. The shark had been defanged and cast out into an ocean that no longer cared if he swam or sank. That evening, I stood on a private balcony of the presidential suite at the Royal Monarch and looked down at the city of Atlanta. The lights of the skyline twinkled like diamonds, a vast ocean of possibilities stretching out to the horizon. The air was cool and sweet, tasting of victory and peace. I held a glass of wine in my hand, but I did not need it to dull any pain. The ache that had lived in my chest for 14 years was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that felt like steel. My phone buzzed on the railing, vibrating against the cold metal. I glanced down at the screen. A message notification popped up from a blocked number. The preview text was short, desperate, and familiar. "Naya, please, it's Mom. I'm sick. I need money for the commissary. Just a little. Please answer me." I looked at the words and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no guilt, no sadness. Just a mild indifference, like looking at a bug on a windshield. I did not open the message. I did not reply. I simply pressed the option to delete all messages from blocked senders and watched as the notification vanished into the digital void. I looked back out at the city, a smile touching my lips. The wind played with my hair, and I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of my own empire. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, but I had learned it well. Blood does not make you family. Love makes you family. Respect makes you family. The people who stand by you when you have nothing make you family. And the people who only want you when you have everything, they are just customers, and my business was closed to them forever.